Iron City, or Old Irontown as it's now called, is a true Utah ghost town located 20 miles west of Cedar City in a part of Utah called Iron County. Once a busy and productive town, it is now abandoned with only a few relics left of its former glory. Nearby Iron Mountain was discovered by the early Utah pioneers. It was abundant in the natural resources necessary to mine and process iron ore and completely untouched. In the early 1800s, there was a huge demand for iron. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing, iron was needed for everything. From the new railroad system that was crisscrossing the country and changing the way people traveled, to military artillery like cannons and guns used in the Civil War. Even farmers and homemakers used iron products for planting and harvesting crops, ironing clothes, and cooking pans to prepare meals. Despite the huge demand for the metal, the only ironworks facilities in the United States were located east of the Mississippi, in places like New Jersey and Maryland. Iron products were expensive and difficult to ship out west. This stone kiln was one of two that were originally built here to create the charcoal used to melt iron ore for molding. The other kiln collapsed years ago, and archaeologists are amazed that this one is still standing today. As you look closely at the inside walls, you can see the dark scorch marks left by the fires that burned here over 150 years ago. Notice the rows of small vent holes run along the bottom edge of the oven. And if you look up at the top of the kiln, you can see the round opening at the very top where the black wood smoke would have been released into the air. As you look around, you can now see the outside of the kiln, sometimes referred to as a beehive oven, because its shape is like that of a beehive. These kilns were used to burn pinyon and juniper wood, both plants that grow plentifully in the area. The kilns were filled with wood as far as the upper door in the back. A fire was lit in the center and all the doors were blocked. Air could only pass through vents built into the kiln walls, and these vents were controlled by the workmen outside. With limited oxygen, the wood was able to burn slowly for several days to weeks, chemically changing the wood into charcoal. This charcoal would then be burned in furnaces at such high temperatures that the iron ore would melt. The terrain surrounding the kiln looks much the way it did back in 1851, when the first group of settlers were sent by Governor Brigham Young to establish the Deseret Iron Company. These new arrivals were made up of fathers, mothers, and children who had been sent by Brigham Young on what he called an iron mission. Young and other early Utah leaders believed that mining and processing their own iron would benefit the young state and allow it to grow. Brigham Young was hopeful that these settlers would set up a community and establish successful mining and forging methods for working with the natural occurring ore. Unfortunately, due to lack of experience and poorly managed, and the ironworks was only able to produce 400 short tons of iron in a 6-year period. This was a huge disappointment to the workers and Utah leaders. In 1858, the ironworks was forced to shut down, and the settlers all had to return home. Despite the earlier lack of success, the idea of mining and processing iron in this area was still something that local people and state leaders wanted to pursue. Utah, like the rest of the United States, needed iron, and there was a growing market. If only someone could figure out how to successfully manufacture it. 10 years after the Deseret Iron Company closed, a man named Ebenezer Hanks, who also happened to be the richest man in Iron County at the time, decided to try his hand at mining and processing the ore. In 1868, the Union Iron Works was organized, funded primarily by Hanks as well as a few other investors. Near the base of Iron Mountain and close to Pinto Creek, a plot of land was chosen for the building of Iron City, a place where the ironworkers and their families would live. On Iron Mountain, the ore was hacked out of the mineshaft walls with pickaxes and brought out in big chunks of rock and dirt. To fit in the blast furnaces, these chunks had to be broken down into pieces no bigger than 2 inches, and the loose soil was removed. The round indentation you see on the ground in front of us was once the site of a huge cylindrical blast furnace that could hold up to 2,500 pounds of ore. The charcoal, previously made in the beehive kilns, was set on fire and would eventually reach a temperature of 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. As the iron melted, it collected on the bottom of the furnace, where it flowed through openings to channels cut in the surrounding stone, eventually ending up in a bed of sand to cool. When hardened, the iron was referred to as pig iron. The chemical impurities that were mixed in with the iron rose to the top in a layer of slag. Removing the slag from the iron made the finished products stronger and more reliable. Iron City blossomed under the direction of Ebenezer Hanks. By 1870, the town boasted 97 people living there. A brick schoolhouse provided for the educational needs of the children. And besides the school, the town had a general store, butcher shop, post office, a boarding house, and over 100 individual homes. The ironworks was also growing, with the blast furnace turning out 5 to 7 tons of pig iron a day. They needed lots of other building to process the raw metal, so the company built its own blacksmith shop, foundry, pattern building, and molding house. They even built an office where the ironworks managers would organize the sale of iron products and take orders for unique tools and machines that needed the strength of iron parts. This tall brick chimney is all that remains of the iron molding house. Together with the pattern specialists, the iron molders melted the pig iron once again and poured the boiling liquid into special molds created in the pattern shop. The heat not only softened the metal, but also helped to remove excess carbon. Carbon is a naturally occurring chemical in iron ore, but too much carbon makes iron that is weak and brittle, causing it to crack and break under pressure. Another important part of the molding process was the use of sand to hold and shape the liquid iron. In order to produce the amount of sand needed, local sandstone had to be pulverized using a huge grindstone known as an aristras. The stone was pulled round and round by mules harnessed to wooden poles that stuck out of the stones like spikes on a bicycle wheel. As the ironworks prospered, people came from all over the country to work here. These new arrivals were not part of the conservative religion that made up most of the population of Utah at the time. These were rough and wild men who worked hard and played hard. The city became known to surrounding communities as a place where drinking and swearing was common. Business was booming, and for Hanks and the Western Iron Company, life couldn't be better. More and more businessmen were anxious to invest their money in the company. The more investment money the company received, the more iron could be produced. And the more iron being produced, the more workers were needed to mine and process the metal. As the ironworks grew, so did the population of Iron City. In the early 1870s, the combined value of the ironworks and the Iron City town site was valued at $109,000. That's like over $3 million today. Local iron products were sold predominantly to people in Utah and surrounding states. Besides household items like stove inserts and molasses rollers, the Western Iron Company produced tracks in the building of the Western Railroad system, machinery for a Nevada mining company, and molded 12 beautiful life-size oxen used as a base for the baptismal font in the St. George Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Temple. Imagine how the sagebrush-covered valley once must have looked with streets full of people and children running about. Nearby, the loud sounds and pungent scents of the ironworks never stopped. As the company continued to process tons of iron ore every day, things were so successful, no one thought it could ever fail. Until it did. The decline and eventual failure of the ironworks in 1876 came about for several reasons. In 1873, there was a huge financial crisis that swept over North America. The economy of the country plummeted, and a recession followed that lasted nearly 10 years. Profits, prices, and wages all fell, while unemployment was on the rise. projects involving iron parts and machinery were put on hold, causing sales and profits to drop dramatically. It was a depressing time for the country in general, and things did not look promising for the Western Iron Company. Ebenezer Hanks realized it was time to get out of the iron business. He sold all his shares of the company but one and walked away. Not all the investors agreed with Hanks, and many searched for ways to save the company. Iron Mountain was still full of iron ore, and the company still had a full complement of equipment and specialists to produce the fine iron products they were known for. If only a way could be found to economically transport their goods to other markets, perhaps they could keep the ironworks going until the recession was over. A plan was suggested to build a railroad between Iron City and Salt Lake City with a route that passed through the mining districts. A local railroad would reduce shipping costs and increase their potential customer pool. Another suggestion was to build a railway system south, down to the Colorado River in order to sell to the southern markets. They went as far as to start grading the land to lay out railroad tracks, but eventually they were forced to give up. The plans might have worked, given enough time and money. Unfortunately, the company had neither. By 1876, the ironworks was forced to shut down all mining and iron processing efforts. With the Western Iron Company's doors shut, the work available to the local residents was minimal, and the now unemployed iron workers were forced to abandon the city in search of other jobs. Almost overnight, the thriving community was transformed into a ghost town of empty buildings and silent machinery. Time and weather took their toll on what was left of Old Iron Town. Dirt blew in through open windows and broken doorways, providing a welcome home to small animals. Plants grew where once tables and chairs used to be. Wood and roofing disintegrated, and rock and brick walls collapsed into piles on the ground. The recession was difficult for the rest of Iron County as well. Local industry slowed, and jobs were hard to find. The 1890 county census shows that the population dropped over 50% from what it had been 20 years before. Eventually, things improved. New industries including farming, mining, oil and gas recovery, and tourism were established in Iron County. And with the increase of jobs, the population increased at a healthy rate. Still, Old Iron Town and nearby Iron Mountain remained dead and abandoned. As new residents moved into the area, they were excited to stumble onto the historical remains of Old Iron Town. Many gathered stones and bricks from the rotting buildings to use in their own houses and landscaping. It seemed that the town and the rich deposits of iron ore in the nearby mountain would be lost from the thoughts and memories of Utahns forever. Then, something happened that would pull the Utah iron industry back into the spotlight. In 1914, the United States entered World War I, and with it came a huge need for iron and steel. Guns, U-boats, submarines, and fighter aeroplanes and infantry support vehicles were in great demand for the war effort. Another game changer for the area was that a railroad line connecting northern Utah and Iron County had finally become a reality. It was no surprise when in 1924, Columbia Steelworks reopened the old ironworks and began mining and processing iron ore from Iron Mountain once again. The modern company used updated processes that had been developed over the years. For example, instead of digging out mine shafts and breaking chunks of rocks with picks and hammers, Columbia Steelworks used a process known as open-pit blasting, which was a faster and more effective way to collect the raw iron ore. Open-pit blasting is a method that uses explosives and gas pressure to blast rocks into pieces from the side of mountains, leaving rock cut lines where the excavation took place. Columbia was eventually purchased by U.S. Steel, and iron was mined continuously until 1980, when the processing costs became too high and the ironworks was closed down for good. Today, Old Iron Town is a state park and part of the National Register of Historic Places. Through the hard work of the local chapter of the Sons of the Utah Pioneers, The ruins and history of Old Irontown and Iron Mountain are now protected and preserved. Fences have been put up, and visitors are no longer allowed to take pieces of the old rock buildings away from the site. Thanks to their efforts, an important part of Utah history has been preserved for future generations to learn about and enjoy. Guests can stroll along a quarter-mile trail that leads through the ruins, with interpretive plaques explaining significant sites to help visitors understand the ironworks and the history of the town. State park rangers estimate that between 5,000 and 6,000 visitors come to Old Irontown to see the beehive-shaped kiln, the great chimney of the molding house, and the foundations of homes and other structural remains. Although we know a lot about the history of Old Irontown, there is still a lot about the town that remains a mystery. No plat maps of the town were saved, so we don't know exactly how the city was set up or where exactly it was located. We don't know how the brick furnaces were built, and the method used to bring water from the creek to the ironworks site. We don't know who lived in the ruined homes, or even how many more ruins there are for future archaeologists to discover. But for now, only the ghosts of Old Irontown know the answers, and they aren't telling.